The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar, How Can You Make Your NG9-1-1 Solution a Success? Start with the Platform, sponsored by Lumen Technologies. Before we get started, there are just a few housekeeping notes to go over. This webinar is being recorded and will be made available along with a copy of the presentation. You have joined in listen-only mode. This helps avoid background noise throughout the webinar. We want this to be as interactive as possible, so please feel free to ask your questions at any time throughout the webinar. The team will answer them at the end of the presentation. If you would like to ask a question, please use the question box in the control panel located on the right side of your screen. We will try to get to as many questions as possible. With that, I'm excited to introduce our presenter. Jim Carlson's career with Lumen has spanned 34 years, and he has held roles in IT, finance, billing, product management, product development, marketing, and sales. Jim has led initiatives at Lumen to bring new technologies to market, rationalize Lumen's product portfolio, and Lumen's entry into the web world. He currently leads the Lumen sales team, helping them describe the power of Lumen's public safety portfolio solutions to customers. Thank you for joining us today. Now I'm going to turn it over to Jim.
Thank you so much. So as was already mentioned, my name is Jim Carlson, and I'm a part of the Lumen team. And what a wonderful privilege it is to spend some time with you all this morning or afternoon, depending on where you are. My role at Lumen is to work with public safety professionals across the country to work on effective ways to journey into the future using technology in the emergency response. And I love what I get to do. In particular, moments like this where the conversation is not so much just on what's going on right now, but when the conversation is where are we going and how do we get there? My background, and as you just heard, 34 years, I guess I'm kind of old. My background back in college was in IT. I was a computer programmer, and so I've loved technology my whole professional life, and it's exciting to be a part of this industry at this time with wonderful folks like yourselves in conversations about the future. How are we going to make this happen? You know, I'm part of the Lumen team, and at Lumen we're a multinational company who's in the business of connecting things. We've been in public safety since 911 started, and we've deployed 10 next-gen 911 solutions across the country. So we come with some experience. But while I am part of the Lumen team, this isn't about Lumen. This is about having a conversation about the future and spending some time and hoping that what I'm sharing with you today is trigger some thinking. That's what I'm trying to do. And so a little bit about how this is going to go for the balance of our time together. I'll spend some time talking. We'll answer questions. The presentation that I'm going through will be made available. And if you'd like to talk in the future, you see right now my email address there on the bottom of the screen. I am happy to spend time with you. This is a subject that I love and love to dialogue on it. So let's go ahead and get started. You know, I think it's always important to kind of begin, as Stephen Covey said, begin with the end in mind. You know, what are we trying to do this morning? What do we want to accomplish? And as I said already, my goal here is to produce some new thinking for you that maybe you can layer on top of how you understand Next-Gen 911 and how you understand your journey into the future. And I think it goes without saying that the world of public safety professionals is complex. There's so many parts to it. The workflow itself of the emergency response has applications and tools and people and handoffs, and public safety professionals are faced with challenges all the time. And so what I want to do this morning is to help you all as much as I can, maybe bring some order to that thought process as we move into the future. How do we wrestle with that complexity and take care of the now, but also the years ahead? And so ultimately what I want to do is to help you all make decisions on taking care of the now and in the future. So I think it's important to I think it's important to begin our conversation with just grounding ourselves on where we are today, because we are going to talk about the future, but you really have to begin with, just kind of statements on where we are now. And so, no secret to anybody here, the way people are communicating is changing. It's changed radically in the last 10 years. And we know that so much, almost all of the calls to 911 when a human is making the call is with a mobile device. And that creates all kinds of challenges on location and changes of location. And it's not like it was when, at the beginning of 911, when all calls were coming from buildings. Buildings tend not to move. And so it was simpler then, it's more complex now. But it's not just that the people calling for help are using wireless devices. We also see that calls for help are coming from all kinds of sources, like a car calls for help or a building calls for help. We see this landscape of how calls get originating or requests for help, let's call it that, it is changing. And I think it's safe to say that however it is now, and however many options we see now for how a call for help or request for help can come to public safety, it's not over in terms of change and evolution. So you can imagine devices that people will wear that will sense when there's a heart attack or a stroke and call for help. Or use your imagination. There'll be all kinds of new ways requests for help will come in. And my point here is it's always changing and it's always evolving. And then when you think about, the applications that public safety uses, those core applications that have been used for so many years that are so important to the emergency response, applications like call handling and CAD and radio systems, these applications are changing and evolving as new players come into the marketplace. We have organizations who are bringing applications to public safety that weren't around 10 years ago. And that marketplace of players and different kinds of applications is evolving. And where those applications live is evolving too. And this is really important. So many of the applications now are going to come from the cloud. And whereas in the past, all applications that a PSAP might use were in the back office. And as a point of evidence, one of the things that I like to do is attend the APCO National Convention. And one of the things I've seen over the past 10 years is really an explosion in the number of companies who are on the exhibit floor, who are companies inventing applications that are hosted in the cloud. It wasn't that way 10 years ago. And even companies who have been around for a while and their applications were in the back office, they're making moves to take those applications to the cloud. So my point is applications themselves are changing, where they live is changing, and so the network connections that you use becomes even more and more important. And then the last thing I want to talk about is all this new data. And to me, that's really exciting, possibility for us to think about. So we know that data exists everywhere, all kinds of data that would be helpful in the emergency response. And there have been lots of moves over the last few years in getting some of that data to public safety through applications that have been created. But we know that the possibilities are literally endless on how existing data or new forms of data could be integrated into public safety and provided to public safety at the right place at the right time. And how that happens and how that will happen is evolving. And so it's going to be important that public safety and the tools public safety uses be adaptive, whether it's new applications or new data. And so what does this all mean in terms of how things are now? And I think this is really important. We have to remember that things are changing all the time. Applications, data, the way people communicate all the time. And those changes affect everything, the workflow, people, everything. And so the technology that public safety uses has to be adaptable and flexible. And it's also important for public safety to have a vision of where your organizations are going in the future and how you want to position the technology you're using to get to where you want to go. And so I think this is a really exciting time for us all to be together on this common journey. And so how do we then think about decisions in the future, and how do we think about how we move into the future based on all those realities that we've seen? And so I want to kind of break decision making into a couple of parts. So, there is a way that I think we've all made decisions about technology. We look at that technology and we say, well, what are my requirements? What do I want to do with that technology? And then we look out there for options and we pick the option that both best meets our requirements, and then we move forward. And that's a journey where we're able to make decisions that really take care of our needs right now. And so what I would like to suggest is, as we move forward, knowing the technology choices we need to make now is very important, and understanding how the technology works, the discrete parts of technology like an EZNet or an emergency services IP network. What is it and how does it work? Or next generation core services, how does that work? Or geospatial information, how's that going to work? Those are all important things to understand, but what I want to talk about today is not those discrete pieces of technology and how we make decisions about those. What I really want to talk about is how do we make decisions about all of it, and how all of it comes together, and how we do it in a way that recognizes the world we live in is so full of change and new things, and how do we be adaptive and move into the future. And so that's what we're going to talk about today. Now, I think it's important, in the journey into the future, when we're looking to figure things out, that our journey into the future really is as effective as the questions that we ask. And so, and I'll touch on that a couple of times, but I do want to go through a couple of questions that I think are foundational, a few questions that are foundational that I think we need to talk about. And so the first one, what is Next Gen 9-1-1, this acronym that was birthed, about 10 plus years ago? Well, the first thing I would say is Next Gen 9-1-1 is not a product. It's not a solution. You can't go into the vendor community and say, can you please sell me a few units of Next Gen 9-1-1? The Next Gen 9-1-1 is concept. It is literally the next generation of 911, which is, it's a journey into the future. Because it's a journey into the future, a lot of decisions have to be made. And so what I would suggest that the real power of Next Gen 9-1-1, and I think this is important, I would say that the real power of Next Gen 9-1-1, or the possibility maybe is a better word to use, is the integration, how the applications that are coming into public safety, with the data that's coming into public safety, how is it integrated into the emergency response workflow, so that workflow, and I think that's the right word to use, workflow, is more effective. So there's more situational awareness, so more lives are saved. And when you think about it, the technology of the past, the E911 technology of the past, was very rigid, and very little information beyond the voice call was provided to public safety. But what Next Gen 9-1-1 is going to do, the concept is an integration through technology of so many possibilities. And so what that tells us is there's a future that we have to think about, a future where we either prepare for it and move towards it, or the future happens to us. And so what I would also like to suggest is that future that we're talking about, and we'll explore a little deeper here in a second, is always evolving. Standard setting evolves Next Gen 9-1-1. New application creators evolve Next Gen 9-1-1. Data is coming in that we've never thought about evolves it. So it's never static, it's never fixed. It's a concept, and it's about the future. And so the next question I want us to consider is, what kinds of decisions need to be made? And I already touched a little bit on this, but I want to kind of revisit this. I'm going to suggest that there's two kinds of decisions that public safety needs to make going forward. The ones that are generally typical to what we always do, which is pick the next solution, like what's the EZNet I want, or what's the call handling solution I want. And those decisions tend to get made on requirements that are known at this time, maybe some leaning into the future, but mostly on the requirements that are known right now. And that's perfectly understandable. And it's a process that will never end because those decisions always have to be made. But what I also want to suggest is there are decisions about the future, like farther out in the future, that need to be made that I'm going to call platform decisions. And so we want to make sure that those decisions get made in such a way that really protects public safety as it moves into the future. Because those kinds of decisions, those platform decisions, have much farther reaching implications than just what's our next CAD solution I want to use. It can either set the stage for the future or limit. And so the real power then of Next-Gen 9-1-1 is to implement platforms that provide for that integration. And so the last question I wanted to reflect on here is there a more powerful way to think about the future of public safety solutions? And I think there is. And I think that the more powerful way is what we're terming here platform thinking. And I'm going to talk about that here in just a second. A way of thinking about the future that asks the right questions so the future is protected. So let me begin by what's a platform. And I think before I get into platform thinking more specifically, and I think this is really important. And so what I would suggest is a platform is a collection of technology. It's not just one piece, it's a collection of technology. And so when a collection of technology, or in our case, a public safety platform, when it integrates the applications and data that the users need, then we have a transformative experience. And so let me give you an example. I'm not sure if you can see this, but this is my iPhone. An iPhone or a smartphone in general is a platform. And the reason I say it's a platform is because it does combine technology and it integrates applications and data, and it evolves over time. And because it produces an experience for me that enables me to have access to not only the applications that I know I need now and the data I know I need now, but also that next cool application that somebody might create a year from now, then it is transformative to me. And the evidence of it being transformative is that we've all had this, that moment where we think we left our iPhone or our smartphone in a restaurant or somewhere where you're not at anymore, and that moment of terror that we experience of, oh my gosh, what about my phone? My point is platforms like an iPhone or a public safety platform, they're collections of technologies that are designed to integrate. And integrate, as I said, is the heart of Next-Gen 9-1-1, integrating how all the elements come together. So platform matters, or should I say the decisions that we make to pick our platforms matter. And so why is platform thinking so helpful? Well, I'm going to offer you some things to think about that I'm terming platform thinking that I think will help guide into the future. Because I think it's important for us to know where we want to go. We have to understand what the parts are and how they fit together. That's important, how they fit together. And by considering those kinds of elements and thinking about the future, we can make decisions that are best positioning us for the future. And so for a future that's evolving in front of us. So there's 4 principles that I want to share at this point that I would like all of us to reflect on. And I'm calling these the key principles of platform thinking. And the first one is know where you're going. And you know that seems kind of obvious, but I want to maybe explore that a little bit. So know where you're going. Education is so important in the thinking about the future and moving into the future. Technology is changing, options are changing. The world itself is more complicated than it was. And it's really important for public safety, whether it's at an agency level or at a state level, to have a really, really powerful story or vision of the future as best we can. because that can be tough. And let me give you an example of why I think that's important. My wife and I are in the middle of building a house, and about a year ago, we decided we wanted to build a house, and so we began what I would call an educational process, where we did our research, we had conversations on the size of the house we wanted, where we wanted to live, and all those things. And we made really fundamental decisions about where we wanted to be 10 years from now and 20 years from now, that then when we sat down with the architect, we could make sure that that vision for the future was reflected in the design that she was going to do. And the reality of that is, if we missed on that, like we're building on a lake. So if a year from now I was to say, man, I wish we were living on a lake and we were living out in the country, the cost of changing things at that point is really, really high. So the process that we went through of educating ourselves first and understanding the future helped prepare us for the future, even when we didn't know exactly what that future would be. And I think the same principle applies here. Education is so important. And the goodness in public safety is there are so many options for education. Wonderful consultants who will sit down with public safety and work through conversations about the future. Lean on the vendor community like Lumen or other vendors that you work with, your peers, organizations like APCO. There are so many forward-thinking helpers out there who can help you think about the future and develop what I would call a real strategy, an actionable strategy that really stretches out maybe 5 and 10 years, which doesn't always happen because we're so focused on making the decisions that need to get made now. But wrestle with the important questions that really need to be wrestled with, like, are you heading to the cloud? If you don't have cloud-based applications today, would you like them in the future? How are you situated relative to cybersecurity? Do you anticipate regional relationships with agencies in your state? What are you going to do with the data? Do you want data? Do you don't want data? All those questions. And how can we identify applications that can help with real live operational issues like acquiring and retaining help? And so my point is, education is so important to inform a strategy that really gives you a vision about the future, and getting the right help is really, really important. The second principle that I want to touch on today is balancing the today and the future. And so, what I like to do is kind of go out into the future and then work backwards from there, because out in the future, things are a little fuzzier. The closer we get to now, the clearer things get. But I think that journey is important. And so, as I said, if you see in the future that the cloud has the right characteristics for your agency, for your state, then working back and saying, well, what applications do we want that could be delivered on the cloud? And what considerations do we need to make in terms of networks and the platforms that we use? That's really important to link that future to the current. What kind of new uses of your public safety platform might you use that maybe aren't on the table right now, but you might do in the future? So, for example, if you have a radio network that needs backhaul infrastructure, and you really want your radio backhaul infrastructure leveraging the same platform as your EZNet, then making sure that the platform that you choose integrates with other use cases or other types of network use cases becomes really, really important. And so making sure that you make decisions for today that help you get to the future that you want. Make powerful decisions then about your platform that you use. And remember that the journey that you're taking into the future is a combination of decisions that you make about the platform that you use, as well as about the applications that you use. And it might seem, a subtle difference, but it actually is not, because a powerful platform that you design into the future will have characteristics like high availability, high performance, will be allow you to have efficient integration with the things that are coming in the future, will have hardened security, and will let you deal with the change and uncertainty of the future. That might be one of the most important things that I would like to communicate today, because the future is so uncertain. And because the journey into the future is a sequence of big decisions that we make, making sure that the big decisions that we make or the platforms that we choose can adapt is important. So what you don't want to have happen is you put in place, for example, an EZNet to do the task of carrying 911 calls to PSAP, but then when you get into the future and you say, well, I'd like to use that network for something else, and if that's not an option or can't get done, then you've limited yourself. And so again, that's why having that vision of the future and at least the possibilities of what you want to do can inform the decisions that you make now. Okay, the last principle that I want to talk on today, and I think this is really important, is criteria that you can use to make decisions on effective public safety platforms. And understanding that we have this evolution over time and the need to enable use cases that we don't even know what they are today, I think the criteria is important. Let me give you an example of criteria. About 15 years ago, my wife and son and I were in a car accident. Nobody was hurt other than bruises with the seatbelt, but our car was totaled. And so when I bought my next car, my number one criteria was safety. And I picked a car that was safe, and I was really happy with it. My point is the decisions that we make are only as good as the criteria we declare on those decisions. And so I want to share these criteria with you because I really think that this is important as we think about platform decisions going forward. So integrating applications wherever those applications live, and I've talked about that, whether it's on the cloud, whether it's in your back office, whether it's in a private data center, in a hosting environment. There's technology out there now. Lumen offers it, others offer it, called edge compute, which takes the place where the applications live and moves it closer to whoever's using it. That can be a powerful option for applications that you use. But ensuring that the platform that you're using enables all those options is important. The next criteria is data, and that really is an awful lot like the applications. We have data that exists literally almost everywhere. And how are we going to bring that data together and integrate it back in with the platform? And you've got companies like RapidSOS who are doing really exciting things. I would call it curating data. So RapidSOS, as an example, is in the marketplace talking to those organizations that have data and bringing that together. And as an example, Lumen and RapidSOS are having conversations about, well, how do we integrate between RapidSOS and our platform? Again, the platform that you choose needs to have the availability to integrate with the data wherever it lives. It also needs to be able to expand when new applications or new data exist. Back to my iPhone example, one of the most powerful tools on an iPhone is an app store because it gives me immediate access to the applications that I want and lets me download. And I think it would be wonderful in the future if our world in public safety was similar, where there was ways you could go into things like an app store and download applications onto your platform, and that may very well be the future. But my point is, we need to be sensitive to the fact that this landscape of applications and data is always changing. The platform that you choose needs to be highly adaptable and flexible and scalable. It has to increase over time. Like one example here is to increase bandwidth over time. So we know that in network, bandwidth is important. The more data, the more applications you want to run across the network, the bigger the bandwidth has to be. And your understanding of what your bandwidth needs today may not be the same in 2 years. And so do you have a platform that can scale up? Have you built connections to your locations that can scale up over time without having you create a whole new network connection for that next application? That becomes a really powerful consideration. Are you able in the platform that you're choosing to leverage new and advanced network technologies? This is important. So one of the network technologies that Lumen is really excited about, it's not new, but its implementation in public safety is software-defined wide area networks, or SD-WAN. And so we're using that in our platforms, and it has all kinds of benefits in terms of integrating multiple network topologies or options, and security and reporting and things like that. My point is, please make sure you're working with a platform that has those new technologies being infused into them as a matter of the platform itself evolving. So you don't need to raise your hand and say, hey, I would like SD-WAN added to my solution. You want to make sure that the solution that you're implementing is flexible enough that it will be evolved as new technologies show up. Next, security. This is so important with the change in the network architecture, these IP networks with applications living in different places, with data needed off the internet. All those kinds of things really remind us that cybersecurity is so fundamentally important. And so make sure one of your criteria for your platform needs to be, make sure that security is built into it. And that's important, built into it, not added to it when it's implemented, but built into it. And the reason built into it is important is the risk for security never ends. It's literally changing every minute. Like the security risks right now are different than what they were when this call started, because that's just the nature of it. So what you want to do is make sure that the platforms that you choose have security built in, and a capability built in, so when things change out there in the security landscape or the threat landscape, those new realities are communicated back into the platform. And at Lumen, we have an organization called the Black Lotus Lab, really a cool name. And their whole journey in life is to watch what's going on, get information from the federal government. We see most of the internet traffic on the world anyhow, just because of our network topology around the world, and take that learning and infuse it into our platforms, because that's so important. Your platforms that you use need to be flexible to add new network use cases. I already talked about this, like a radio backhaul network that you could just add another solution to an already existing infrastructure that you have in place. It's really important to be able to have access to those solutions that tend to be really important for platforms, really important for public safety, but maybe not necessarily a part of the common conversation about next-gen 911, like storage and disaster recovery and things like that. That becomes important. Another criteria is that the platform is built before you implement it. And here's what I mean by that, and I think this is important. A lot of times what happens is a decision is made to implement like an EZNet with next-gen core services in a particular place, and it gets built. It gets designed and built based on the requirements that are defined and what's needed in that instance at that time. And there's nothing particularly wrong with that, but I would say that when you are implementing a platform that has already been designed, whether it's for security or capabilities like SD-WAN, and you're more plugging into that design, it's already been thought out, then you're getting the full range of capabilities that you need. And then having end-to-end monitoring of that platform, whether it's your solution provider or your monitoring of it, is really important criteria to pay attention to. And then finally, working with organizations, whoever they are, working with organizations who have the organizational experience to design and implement platforms that will take you into the future. So there you're talking about thought leaders and visionaries who can say, here's what we're seeing, and here's what we need to build to, and here's what we need to take care of. That becomes really important. And so at this point, I just want to step you through a visualization of the platform and just kind of build it in front of you and touch on a few things to maybe summarize some of the things that I've shared. And so, of course, this is through the lens of Lumen, because that's who I work for. But this first picture, you see this blue cloud that is our MPLS network that goes around the world. And, we've termed it here an EZNet Plus. And the plus really is to just signify that the notion of EZNet has I think a common notion of EZNet is connectivity from wherever next-gen core services exist to a PSAP. And that's hugely important in next-gen 911. But as I've already said, the use cases for this network infrastructure can go beyond that for public safety, whether it's a citywide network where there's video sharing going on, or a radio backhaul network. And so, but it does start off with the core network infrastructure. And in the case of public safety, with next-gen core services built to public safety grade with security built in. And you can see in this diagram where on the originating service providers, or wherever the call for help starts, there's an integration there. But as I said already, those originations of calls for help is going to evolve. It's not just going to be wireline companies and VoIP providers and wireless providers. The future is going to bring new ways. Help is going to be, requests for help will be made, and so new ingress options. And you can see kind of around the diagram where we have a portal and access, scalable access to the PSAPs and connection to other EZNets or other use cases. That EZNet to EZNet connection becomes so important. And then the next step in the building out of the platform is layering in applications. And you'll see several of the applications that are common to public safety now. That list is going to grow over time, and those applications can exist in a lot of different places. So the MPLS or the IP network that you're using needs to be able to connect to the AWS, to Azure, and locations like that where those applications could exist, or other options that the application provider might choose to house their application. And then in this next iteration of the slide, you really see the explosion of data. And as I said, this to me is maybe the most exciting development in the future of next-gen 911, or the future of public safety, because as we have platforms in place that can integrate the applications themselves with all this data from IoT devices, smart cities, from alarm sensors, wherever the data is coming from, when it all can come together into applications, that data, when it can come together into applications that can really help public safety learn from the data and make decisions on the data, this machine learning and artificial intelligence, that to me is enormously exciting. And you can really see how it's going to help PSAPs use their resources more efficiently. It's going to help first responders get better information and make decisions in the field better. And it's so exciting to watch that play out. And then finally, those services that need to be integrated in the platform that really go beyond like typical next-gen 911 services are important as well. And so let me begin to wrap this up, and thank you all so much for spending time with me together. As I mentioned, this is the topic that I love to talk about. In some ways, me talking about the future of public safety can feel very theoretical. And in many ways it is. And sometimes we have to exist in that world of 10 years out and say, what is the possibilities that we're building towards, and give those proper consideration. But also, building platforms and running platforms is happening today. And there's a couple of exciting examples that I want to talk to. In the state of Oregon, we've done some exciting work with Frank Kuchta and Pat Lustig in the state to leverage the already existing data network that the state of Oregon has in place, that Lumen provides, that originally just carried alley traffic to all PSAPs in the state, but they wanted to take that platform and they wanted to evolve it to be able to carry rapid SOS supplemental location information. And the reason they wanted to do that was twofold. One was to provide that information to the PSAP. So that's very important. You all know, the supplemental location information at this point and for the near future is so important. And so having that was really important to PSAPs in the state. But also they wanted the information, the data sent across a stable network that was secure. And that was really important to them. So they had a already existing network that all we needed to do was, and I'm oversimplifying this, I'm not an engineer, plug Rapid SOS's information into, and there was a lot of work around security on that, so I don't want to oversimplify it. But the theory is you integrate that data that public safety can use in Oregon, and then you make that available across the state. And what a wonderful development for public safety professionals in the state, led by Frank and Pat and all those great public safety professionals in the state. And what a wonderful example it was for Lumen to partner with Rapid SOS, and for the state and Rapid SOS and Lumen to work together. What I tell people around me all the time here at Lumen is that public safety is a team sport, and we all have to work together, and so that's a great example of it. In another example of implementing a platform is in the state of South Dakota. And the state of South Dakota went through a process of strategy formation and creating a vision of where they wanted to go. And Maria King, who leads 911 in the state, was actually, a lot of that work had started before she took over the role, but she kind of took that strategy and then brought it into implementation. And what they wanted to do was to create a statewide ESInet that could be used for handling next-gen 911 calls. But they also wanted to deliver call handling to all the PSAPs in a managed services delivery model. And so we were able to have the opportunity to deploy that network, to deploy Intrado's Viper call handling solution across 28 PSAPs in the state. And it really was a fantastic example of putting a platform into place that was going to immediately help Maria and team as they moved into the future. So one of the first things that they did was implement text to 911 across the platform and making it available to all PSAPs instead of having to do it one at a time. And so you can see in these two examples how if you have a vision for the future that can then tie back into the decisions you make now, that can create really powerful possibilities for citizens in your state. And so the last slide I want to share with you then is just kind of a pause and a reinforcement of the importance of platform thinking. And again, and I mean this honestly, I'm not sharing this, because Lumen's involved in this. I mean, I am proud of these awards. Don't get me wrong, but I think the more important message is a wonderful organization like Frost & Sullivan, Brent Laterola in particular. I've had many conversations with Brent. They really recognize the power of platform thinking. So much that they've created awards that have been focused on looking at players in the marketplace who deliver public safety platforms. And I think the thing for us to remember in that is maybe the layered on thinking that it produces for us. And by that I mean, we all have a way of thinking about the future in public safety that is, robust in many ways, growing in other ways. But the notion of thinking about platforms then becomes one more layer of our thinking. And so I love what Brent and his team have articulated in their studies about how platforms can really help public safety positions for the future. And I'm really excited about Lumen's opportunity to be a part of that. And I think the last thing I want to say before I wrap it up, and we have time for questions, we got about 15 minutes left, is for all of you who are on this webinar, who are part of the public safety community, I want to thank you for what you do. I've said this many times to folks I talk with, what do you do, what's your job, kind of questions people will ask me. And when I tell them I get to work with public safety professionals, I'm always so honored to be able to say I get to work with people whose job it is to save other people's lives. And I think that's pretty cool. And so I want to thank you for what you do. Thank you for journeying with me this morning or this afternoon or whatever your time frame is. And so at this point, we will take any questions that you have.
Jim, we have a couple of questions here, more than a couple. The first one is a two-part question. One is asking you to speak to the importance of standards, and they're also asking if the Lumen platform is standards-based.
So that's a great question. You know, standards are, standards are so important. And the reason standards are so important is because it really is kind of everything that I've shared over the last 45 minutes. When you look at the workflow of the emergency response, and you look at how many parts there are, how many handoffs there are, how many people need to get involved, and then you look at the explosion of applications and data, and then you're changing the architecture for how all of this gets delivered from a very static, rigid architecture to a IP broadband architecture. You have to make sure that the parts fit together. And there's like a logical reason for that. You want the parts to fit together. It's like when I go to Walmart and buy a toaster and I plug it in the wall, I don't want to have to think about, is that electrical socket going to take the cord for my toaster? Because of standards, it always does. It's the same principle in public safety. Because you have a vendor community who is building new things, the vendor community has to build the standards that will ensure that things will fit together, because they have to fit together. So absolutely, Lumen is committed to following standards. You know, we're active in standard setting bodies. We recognize that in just about every request for proposal, RFP, or really any conversation we're having with customers, they want to make sure we're following standards. And those are good questions to ask, because when you commit to following standards, what you're saying is, I'm protecting your future. So yes, absolutely, we're committed to that.
Excellent. So the next question is, where in the US Lumen have a fully built out SCNet capable of coast routing, text to 911, video, etc.? I think you already referred to this earlier, but if you want to expand on that.
Yeah, so here's the way I would think about that, maybe further explore my point. So when you look at Lumen as a company, we're a network company. That is our core, our DNA, who we are. And we have multiple data networks around the world. And so like physically separate, logically separate networks. So it's not just one, it's two. And so that network stretches around the world, stretches around the country, stretches around local communities, and is already in place. And so the cybersecurity protocols that we have with Black Lotus Labs is already in place. The use of SD-WAN is already in place. The use of edge compute where we need to is already in place. The connectivity to AWS and Azure is already in place. So all those things are already in place because of who we are. This is who we are. And so we're implementing right now NG9-1-1 or SCNet in New Jersey. And so we are able to, there is work that has to be done in New Jersey for sure in the implementation, getting out to the PSAPs, the 248 PSAPs in New Jersey, but we're able to plug into that already existing, already built, already thought through and designed architecture that has been in place for a long time.
Okay. The third question here is, what kind of time frame are we looking at for SCNet functionality and rapid integration?
Oh, wow, what a great question. You know, so I think, so I've been around, you know, I've been around in the business for 34 years. So I've seen a few transformations, like the introduction of the internet, MPLS, IP. You know, I've seen multiple transformations like that. And what's going on right now in public safety is a data transformation that really is just like the birth of IP. And so what that means is there's the predictable early adopters, that's not a whole lot of people, and then an acceleration, and then you kind of plateau off. My opinion is we're seeing that acceleration now. We've seen it for the last 3 years, where a lot of companies are making moves into the marketplace, are making moves to implement SDNet because it's time for them in their states or their cities. And so, so we're seeing a lot of that activity now that we haven't seen like maybe 3 years ago or 5 years ago. So there's an acceleration there. There's an acceleration going on in the marketplace as newer entrants, like think about a Carbine or companies like that. They're not, I wouldn't call them new, but they have innovative technology, and so they're bringing that into the market. And there's other players like them who are doing the same thing that we haven't seen before. And then there's players like, Rapid SOS or Intrado who are curating data at an accelerating form that you have to have in place. And I think all of it's coming together. And so I think that, in a couple of years, what I'm looking for is the application that kind of integrates things from all those sources and presents it to public safety in a way that's really helpful and drives efficiency, the kinds of efficiencies that you want to drive that are not in the application itself. So you can look at like call handling as an application and see things within call handling that can make a PSAP more efficient. But what I'm interested in seeing is where is the efficiency going to get driven when you can integrate all the applications across the mix and all the workflows across the mix. And so I think we're probably, I would say, a couple years out from that. And so to me, that's why having platforms in place that are kind of the first step, if you will, having the platforms in place is so important. I remember when I got my first iPhone, there were very few applications I could download, but the concept was there. And now years and years later, there's multiple smartphones and the ability to get a hold of applications has increased. And so it's going to take time.
Thank you. One last question. How can technology help with real world issues like staffing?
Oh, that's a great question, man. So for, staffing is a challenge everywhere. I have staffing issues trying to, fill positions on my team. And I know PSAPs have staffing issues and restaurants have staffing issues. And, it's a concern across the country. And it's complicated. There's a lot of variables that go into acquiring or enticing folks to come work for you and then keeping them there, which is even more important. And so as I think about what can technology or what can platforms do to help with that, I think there's lots of options. I think a platform that can enable applications that makes the experience of the dispatcher better, helps them be more effective, can be a employee retention tool. I think for some PSAP employees who really are tech savvy, and many of them are, many that I talk to are very tech savvy, helping them have exposure to new technology and be a part of the process of decisions on new technology can help retain employees. I think part of the journey of driving the efficiencies of having leveraging technology to maybe make routine decisions that a person makes today, but maybe some kind of artificial intelligence or machine learning could do in the future. You're never going to take the person out of the mix, but maybe there's some really basic things that you could offload, which creates more efficiency in the center. So I think what I always appreciate is when I have a chance to talk with folks here in my company about what it means to be in a PSAP, I always bring them back to really the call center nature of it, the fact that, it is a process. Calls come in, information needs to be gathered, handoffs happen between parties or organizations in the company to get to, the first response or those processes are ripe for efficiency, and I think technology can do that. but we have to make sure that we put platforms in place that can enable that.
Wonderful. Thanks, Jim. That's all the questions we have for now.
All right, great. Well, we will go ahead and wrap up today's webinar. Thank you again to our presenter, Jim, and thank you to our sponsor, Lumen. You will receive an email with instructions on printing your certificate, as well as how to access the recording of this webinar and other materials. Thank you again, everyone, for joining us today. This concludes our webinar.